Jaws, Star Wars, Alien, Rambo, Top Gun, Die Hard, Mission Impossible, Independence Day, The Matrix, Fellowship of the Ring, even Harry Potter. Films, popular movies, movies that not only are important culturally, but that changed the landscape of cinema at the time. Summer blockbusters. It's summer now, hot if you're anywhere near I am. In fact, some places are hitting record-breaking hots. I'm sure that's gonna be fine. And what's a better way to beat the heat than slipping into the cool, dark, sticky-floored room of a movie theater? Taking a break from that bright sun as the projector graces the moving pictures on the silver screen as the speakers shake your seat. So what's in the movies right now? Jurassic World Dominion? Lightyear? Minions Rise of Gru? Top Gun Maverick? We have a couple like Nope and Elvis, but even Elvis has me feeling kinda cynical. It's been a hard time lately. The planet is melting and freezing. Politically, things are not great. We got monkeypox now, and we haven't even fully recovered from COVID. So for the sake of that summertime magic that almost feels like it's disappeared this year, I wanted to turn back the clock. Not to an inherently better time, but simply to a different one. June of 1975.
Good evening. More than 100 people were reported dead in a plane crash near New York's Kennedy Airport this afternoon.
Angelina Jolie and Tobey Maguire just popped into the world. A record-breaking sandstorm was sweeping through the California desert, and the CIA was paying people to take just way too much LSD. As a young up-and-coming film protege was just breaking into television, and the freaking motion pictures. After the success of his TV movies, Duel, Something Evil, and Savage, he got his first theatrical movie with The Sugarland Express, and people could start to see the potential of the young Jewish director. Producers from Universal, Richard Zanuck and David Brown, saw the spark of a kid who had been making better films than me since he was 12, and they took a risk and set him up to work on an adaptation of Peter Benchley's thriller novel, Jaws, that would release a year before the movie of the same name. I of course am talking about Steven Spielberg, an insanely talented and legendary director whose influences on the industry and culturally cannot be summed up in one video, who's been putting up back-to-back bangers for longer than I've been alive, even up to last freaking year. Jaws changed everything for the young director and led him and film down a path that he's on today. And after years of Jurassic Park being my untouchable favorite Spielberg picture, on a dark summer evening we went down into our basement and slid in our Jaws 2-tape VHS on our tiny 12-inch tube TV. I had only seen it once before on our huge flat-screen TV in 4K, and while it looked amazing, on a first watch, I just wasn't all that impressed. I just didn't really get it. But in that cold basement on that hot day, with our tiny low-quality sound and TV, just me and my brother, something clicked in the movie with me. And I fell in love with it. Every aspect of this sun-soaked summer monster movie clicked for me, with its small character moments to its comedy and sincerity, and even its horror, leading it to not only be my favorite Spielberg movie now, but be a movie that I'm obsessed with culturally. It's kind of the perfect blockbuster. The kind of movie that they don't really make much anymore, and didn't make at all before this. So that's what we're going to talk about this humid, rainy summer, so strap in for Steven Spielberg's Jaws, and the summer blockbusters of yesteryear.
I can swim! Just can't walk or dress myself.
So, what exactly makes a blockbuster? Well, according to the dictionary, it's a thing of great power or size, in particular a movie, book, or other product that is a great commercial success, which is a great definition. Again, our Marvel, our random Disney, our Top Gun Mavericks of today. So, what makes me say blockbusters of yesteryear in such a longing, wish-washy way? Well, it's not that all blockbusters are bad now, or that they were all perfect before. In fact, I've really liked a lot of the really popular movies lately, like Maverick and The Batman, and even Dune is one of my favorite movies in a while. But really it's because Jaws and several movies that would come out around this time were essentially a powder keg, sitting on a new era for the art form of cinema. Not long before the release of Jaws, movies were widely considered almost a lesser art form to something like stage acting or literature. Things with, at the time, real prestige around them. Movies are cool and all. You'd take your family to go see them. They would come out and stay in theaters for months, banking on word of mouth and just knowing that that movie would be there for a while, so you could just go and get a ticket for whatever collection was in whenever you wanted. It didn't really matter as to what the movie actually was. The only thing that really stood against that format at the time was musicals. As former video essayist and author Lindsay Ellis put it, musicals were really the superhero movies of their time. They wanted them to tap into that popularity and prestige of real theater, even going on road shows before they'd get released in normal theaters, with black tie dress codes and much higher prices, and even a playbill type thing. But the oversaturation of musicals and the prices in marketing only playing towards the upper class, it would lead the film industry down an unfortunate path as audience started growing tired of the same old things, leaving studios to suffer majorly with the cost it took to produce even what was considered a low-budget musical at the time. Right around the same time as musicals were going down, the economy in the film industry crashed and film censorship was broken up, almost killing several studios and making Gene Kelly give up on directing altogether. It was a rough time in the film industry, but it led to my favorite period of cinematic invention and ingenuity, the 1970s. The 70s, all in all, were a big step for what we know as modern America, as the lampshade of the American dream of perfection started to kind of fall apart through the 60s, and many of the pinnacles of art at the time were also falling down. I mean, Walt Disney himself died, leaving his world-renowned company in shambles with the cost of his lofty dream world almost leading to the end of Disney animation altogether. And young Spielberg, given the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance that very few others would get, went to meet with the producers and marketing team, who are well into marketing for the book, to make sure it would be a success for the movie that they were already planning. They needed it to be. They started sending copies of books to anyone and everyone, from producers and critics to random store and restaurant owners. Unlike most movies at the time, next to only something like The Godfather, who had released a couple years prior, they were trying to get as many people talking about it as they could beforehand, to drum up more than just the typical, here's that new movie that's in the theater. And they already had plans to do more that hadn't really done before. They were giving this hot new book to a young, unexperienced director and giving him a full film crew on an island, and the resources to film on the water in a way that had never been done before. There was already a lot of buzz about the movie for filmmakers, but Brown and Zanuck wanted to look for a way to bring this buzz to movie-going audiences. So almost a year before the movie would be even ready to release, they went to Cannes Film Festival, getting excitement stirred up along the way with the very successful release of the book that same year. And wasting no time afterwards, they even planned several international releases and press for the movie. Something was different with this movie, and they could feel it. This was their gold mine, and they had struck deep, and they were going to clear out every last nugget. They started advertising for it on TV as much as they could, on almost every channel they could. Sports and fiction and everything in between, something that yet again was almost never done prior, especially for a movie that was given any level of prestige by the studio. And as for the release of the movie itself, even Spielberg said the release pattern was a key element in the film's success. Initially, Universal was as excited about marketing the film as Bantam was in marketing the book. Universal had planned a mass saturation blitzkrieg campaign in more than 1,000 theaters. I didn't think then that Universal knew what it had on its hands. But even this was a little too overambitious, and they felt it reflected negatively on the perceived quality of the film, and cut it down to a still hearty 403 theaters to open in. At the time, the more theaters a movie released in at once, the worse it was thought to be, as it wasn't good enough to build up a long run in a few theaters. But they wanted to make it something special, a once-in-a-lifetime experience of a movie that you couldn't miss and could be viewed by as many people at once for a short time. Ads everywhere, the book was a hit, and an event was approaching, not just for the rich, musical-loving roadshow crowd, but for everyone. And when the day came for the movie to be released in the hundreds of theaters across the US on the same day, it was like no other movie had ever been before. There were lines outside of movie theaters all around the country to get in to see Jaws as soon as they could. It was the first real blockbuster, next to only The Godfather, but even it itself only released in 3 theaters at first. And it soon broke records not just for box office, but also home rentals, and with the roaring success, it became one of the first movies to ever be heavily merchandised. Jaws posters, Jaws shirts, lunchboxes, that was it, the golden child of modern cinema, and it stunned audiences in all the right ways. Jaws changed things culturally in a lot of ways. It not only essentially invented the blockbuster, but it also affected almost every major blockbuster to come after it, and even though a lot of which in the early days were still Steven Spielberg movies. But I wanted to focus on something in particular that I think is interesting and new coming from Jaws culturally. Jaws the film is rated PG for parental guidance advised here in the US, but at the time this didn't really mean the same thing it does now. So pretty much prior to the 70s there was this film board and a production code, a bunch of old guys who sat around and watched movies, and if they thought there was too much violence or sex or language or pretty much anything that they didn't want, they wouldn't approve of it.
You really think they're gonna let you put out a whole movie just about tits? Sure. Doesn't like tits.
This made a bunch of films be censored, and if you didn't get the film board approval, you wouldn't look like a reputable movie, most theaters wouldn't bring you in, and you couldn't make the same amount of money. But many people thought this was unfair for the filmmakers, and thought it was too harsh and that there was too much censorship. And in 1968, this code would be dropped as a new board member took over the MPPDA, or Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America, and changed it drastically to put control back in the hands of the people creating the movies and the theaters themselves, instead of deciding what got made and what got distributed, even changing its name to the now MPAA, or Motion Picture Association of America. And with the dropping of this code and movies no longer just having the ability to be approved or not approved, they still wanted to have a way to let you know what was in the movie, to make sure the average family with kids wasn't going to walk into a porn movie without any idea. So they made film ratings, where again this board would be in charge of watching movies and deeming it one of 4 ratings: G for general audiences, PG for parental guidance, R for restricted to kids without adult, and X for anything too steamy or violent. You'll notice that the ratings are a little bit different from ours now, even missing one of the most common now, PG-13, and with the creation and only 4 ratings, it was still rather loose, the wide variety of things that could fall under PG before something hit R. That's why watching 70s PG movies can sometimes blow your socks off with how much graphic violence or nudity was allowed in a PG movie back then, when several of them couldn't even make the PG-13 cut now. And Jaws is one that definitely would push the boundaries of what would be PG now. And it rode a new line of not being too explicit to drive away most families, despite its skinny-dipping opening and rather intense amounts of blood, but to still be extremely shocking to its modern-day audiences with its violence that would scare them in such a way that film almost hadn't since the first film of a train made everyone scream. It was something that was almost fascinating how well the horror worked in it. It was a true, modern-day, summertime horror in a way that had never been done before. It was nothing like the previous horror of the 60s and earlier, with their heavily classical literature and gothic or monster influences, where there was always some deep-spoken male and a screaming damsel in distress. This was horror that was coming for the very people watching the movies. Summer vacationers. This movie had a drastic enough effect on people being scared of sharks that it actually did a lot of damage to the reputation and population of sharks, almost killing off hammerhead sharks. Again, like the first train driving towards the audience, it struck a chord of filmmaking that had never ever been done before or felt by audiences, in a way that made it something that they had to see, something that had never been seen before. And on top of this, almost tapping into a rebirth and revival of filmmaking's interaction with modern audiences, it also ran into heavy critical success for its outstanding special effects and lighting, despite even their shark animatronic never working, leading it to actually be more scary, with the shark barely ever being seen until the end. Its performances, its comedic and intense leads, on top of several Oscar wins, it even got nominated for Best Picture, and there's no wonder why. Its intense and visceral direction roots from Spielberg from things like Duel and Something Evil, combined with the outstanding technical achievements and realism on the water and boat sequences, to a story that reached out to the audiences that were watching it, criticizing them, scaring them, feeling for them. One of my all-time favorite scenes in cinematic history is the boat scene at night, when Brody, Hooper, and Quint are all in the cabin, barely getting along before this, with Brody's fear of the water feeling like an outsider, Quint's hard exterior, and Hooper being a goofy little person.
25 years there's never been a shooting or a murder in this town.
They all sit and start to have one of the most real heart-to-heart conversations I've ever seen in a movie. Everything slows down. There's almost nothing but the rock of the boat. A moment of peace before more shark horror. And Hooper and Quint start sharing stories about scars, getting bigger and laughing and getting drunk, until Brody asks where Quint got a scar on his arm. And he goes into his iconic monologue about the horrifying night on the USS Indianapolis, a backstory added by the team of screenwriters that wasn't originally in the book. Things got so intense and intimate as pretty much all three of their motivations for being there get laid out, even as Brody looks down at his scars from getting shot, protecting people. Nothing glamorous to be shown off, and he decides he isn't fully the same as these two men. It breaks down all of their fates. The rich kid who's just essentially having fun, the obsessed hunter looking for revenge on everything, and the man just trying to protect his family and home. And all of these characters struck a chord with US audiences at the time, and like all horror, played into many of the fears of war and unreasonable killing coming for your home and children and the places you feel the safest, like a summer beach on a hot windy day, or the 4th of July, a celebration of America. And every single element of this extremely dialed in for as many hands that had touched it story plays out into the themes and the stakes, making for such a personal, visceral story that honestly was shared the best for me on a tiny TV in the cold, where I could feel its history emanating from it. Everything about this movie created what blockbusters are today. Even its iconic ending was crafted just to get the best, most enjoyable reaction from the audiences, another point where the movie differed heavily from the book. It was the perfect storm and created a movement that couldn't and wouldn't be stopped. Star Wars would come next, then E.T. and Jurassic Park and countless others would follow in the footsteps of Jaws' marketing and movie structure and goal. Spielberg himself contributed again and again to several as they would go back and forth between breaking each other's records, driving home more and more change, and even the invention of the PG-13 rating after his controversial violent dark sequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark. But Jaws is really where the blockbuster was born, and will stay in my heart both as the perfect summer horror movie, but as the perfect event movie, where every frame is steeped in something new and something historical, something that feels like you can only truly capture it once, just as almost all classic cinema feels.
What kind of a shark is it? Gee, I don't know. I think it's a macaw. Got a deep throat, Pratt. Yeah, but what kind? What kind of shark?
It's a tiger shark. A what?
Now, am I saying we've done it? We've killed blockbusters by following the same structure and formula for over 50 years after? Well, yes and no. I think this kind of movie creation and production works, and brings forward some of the best audience success for actual good movies over the years. The fact that the Lord of the Rings trilogy is something that even happened, let alone being the mass and critical darling that it is a miracle unto itself. I love blockbusters. So many of the most influential movies throughout my lifetime and influential pieces of art on my lifetime have been what would be considered kind of popcorny blockbuster movies, because they can and do have really good craft behind them, but not all the time. And at the moment, what I think is kind of making me feel so bleak towards blockbusters isn't that these blockbusters of quality and true craft and influence behind them aren't still being made, but that they're so far in between and to such shaky and different reception. That's why I think it's so important to look back on blockbusters like Jaws and Temple of Doom and The Matrix and countless others through history, is looking at what they've done for the landscape of film, and what modern blockbusters are doing. Like musicals before it, I can't help but look at reboot after reboot, legacy sequel after legacy sequel, MCU movie after MCU movie, and think, how much more of this do we have before it all disappears? Before modern audiences get tired of this and move further and further away from movies again? After the record-breaking event of a blockbuster double feature with Infinity Wars and Endgame, which again, in and of themselves, are insanely impressive and outstandingly tie together projects like no other movies before it even came close to doing. Movies have honestly become even more of just event movies, or brand names. It's all become, you have to see this movie in this series before you hear anything about it, or else you might accidentally hear who's acting in the movie or get tainted by the naysayers who just don't get the brand. It's just a really unhealthy way to consume movies that's just there to get people in seats. And again, I can track the build of this marketing style directly from Jaws. It's there and it's just good business, I'm not denying that. But so were musicals, until they weren't, and almost bankrupted the studios that pumped so much money into making them. And instead of essentially letting them die out and letting something new and exciting take their places like musicals and westerns before them, they instead have lived on with endless source materials and fan base, with each new movie becoming essentially a shell of what the ones were before it. Sometimes this doesn't happen. Again, Top Gun Maverick, I honestly think, is way better than the first Top Gun movie, building on it in every way to something new and better off than what we had going in. But that's not the majority of films coming out, and the ones from the small, new, up-and-coming filmmakers who are here to make the changes that Jaws made at the time it came out are mostly just getting drowned out. Especially with COVID and the rise of streaming services, movies are even more restricted just to get more money from people to get them on their streaming service. Things get isolated, pumping out the same and the same and the same and the same, and eventually audiences are not that excited and willing to pay money to just sit back and watch the same, even if its quality hasn't changed much. So yeah, I look back at those simpler summers that were in fact definitely not simpler with fondness, trying to remember what made them so special, and what made summer so special in the first place. It's not that it's always there, or that it always looks the same, or breaks you from work or school. It's that it's always something new and fresh. It's the season of possibility after new life in spring, where anything can happen and new adventures can always be had. I'm just hoping we can all take a step back and look to the new before we get drowned out by the coming fall. Have a good summer, everyone. Enjoy it while you can. Also, I watched Nope after writing this script, and I just wanted to comment a little bit on Nope now that I've seen it twice. It's actually really insanely impressive. I cannot suggest it enough. I'm considering doing a video on it because it's essentially the modern-day Jaws of horror movies. So yeah, go watch Nope in theaters, seriously. Go watch Marcel the Shell. Just do what you can to help support movies that are actually trying to do something good and new. And I know it's super easy to get obsessed and caught up in your brand because that's fun and it gives you a community, but there are other things out there. So make sure you take time to enjoy stuff because there are still creators trying to do new cool things, and Jordan Peele is definitely one of those. So yeah, go check out Nope.